the misconceptions and rumours surrounding Final Fantasy 64. Hey there, today we are going to talk about the Final Fantasy VI interactive CG game, often misnamed as Final Fantasy 64. Before I begin, I would like to clarify that all sources in this video will be linked in the description down below, but please do stick around to the end as I really hope you will enjoy my video essay. In 1994, Square began development on the newest installment of their popular Final Fantasy series, Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII began life on the Super Famicom, known as the Super Nintendo in the West. Unfortunately, during production, focus had to be shifted away from Final Fantasy VII to another Square property called Chrono Trigger, putting Final Fantasy VII on hold for a short while. While finishing off work with Chrono Trigger, the production team had noticed a rise of 3D graphics in gaming. The possibility that 3D could achieve a fuller and richer story was too tempting, especially since the Super Famicom was nearing the end of its life. With the Nintendo 64, known as the Ultra 64 at the time, on the horizon, the Sony PlayStation currently released as well as the Sega Saturn, the team decided to opt for 3D graphics. In 1995, production resumed on Final Fantasy VII, with Square opening up graphics and research facilities in Japan and Los Angeles, USA. They took out ads in magazines to advertise job opportunities for those with the appropriate experience. They were looking for people with extensive 3D experience, and went on to hire a former ILM artist by the name of Paul Ashdown, whose previous work included Star Wars and Jurassic Park. They also hired artists from Digital Domain who had worked on Terminator 2 Judgment Day. In total, over 120 artists and programmers using powerful Silicon Graphics Onyx workstations were all working at once on Final Fantasy VII. From the 6th to the 11th of August, 1995, at the SIGGRAPH convention, the team showcased a 3D game demo with the title Final Fantasy VI Interactive CG Game. To say people were stunned is an understatement. The demo looked amazing. There is only one surviving video of this interactive demo available, and it was showcased on the Japanese PlayStation game demo disc, Square's Preview Extra, Final Fantasy VII Sample, and SIGGRAPH 95 Works. The demo contained the characters Locke, Shadow, and Terra from their previous game Final Fantasy VI in a battle setting against a rock golem. The interactive aspect of this demo was to use a cursor to draw shapes on the screen to trigger the in-game attacks and moves. While the game was waiting for an attack to be engaged, the camera would move around the environment in real time. Once an attack was chosen, either by the player or the AI enemy, an animation would begin for that attack. Once the attack was over, the game would then go back to its waiting camera movement. Near the end of the tech demo, in the only surviving video, we see the player summon the dragon Bahamut. That kicks off the most impressive animation in this demo, as a bolt of lightning pierces the sky and Bahamut appears in the explosion. The dragon then launches a fierce fire blast on the rock golem, not only destroying it, but the castle behind it. The credits then roll as the heroes fly off into the sunset. People were amazed. Press were amazed, and everyone was looking forward to the release of the next installment of Final Fantasy. Unfortunately, many of the reporters at the time assumed that because it was using Silicon Graphics Onyx workstations, which was what the Nintendo 64 was to be based on, that the next installment would be coming out for the Nintendo 64. This assumption was also reinforced by the fact that Square had been pretty faithful to Nintendo in the past, with all previous Final Fantasy installments being exclusive to Nintendo. Many articles were written about this playable 3D tech demo that was now being mistitled as Final Fantasy 64 by many gaming journalists, some even going as far as to say as the game would be released for the Nintendo 64 as early as December 1996. Even official sources got this wrong, with the UK's Nintendo Magazine system reporting that Final Fantasy VI was going to be for the Ultra 64. The rumour mill was in full swing as fans started to speculate on what was to be included in the upcoming installment of Final Fantasy on the Nintendo 64. However, the game was never in development for any system in particular, and all publications were reporting on the demo was an indication of a final product, when in fact it was nothing more than a tech demo. The production team had not settled on a final system or platform to develop for yet. The biggest concern was game size. With a game of this scope and team size in production, the game was becoming rather large. Nintendo was sticking with cartridges for its upcoming console, the Ultra 64, with reportedly only 4 megabytes of initial cartridge storage. This was going to be nowhere near large enough to store Final Fantasy VII. Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy, expressed his worries after the fact in an interview for PlayStation Underground No. 2. It was also featured on a Final Fantasy VII VHS.
When we discussed designing the field scenes as illustration or CG based, we came up with the idea to eliminate the connection between the movies and the fields. Without using blackout at all and maintaining the quality at the same time, we would make the movie stop at one cut and make the characters move around on it. We tried to make it controllable even during movies. As a result of using a lot of motion data plus CG effects in still images, it turned out to be a mega capacity game, and therefore we had to choose the CD-ROM as our media. In other words, we became too aggressive and got ourselves into trouble.
In another interview, Sakaguchi stated,
"The Final Fantasy VI CG demo we made for the SIGGRAPH exhibition took 20 megs all by itself. We thought that demo had a lot of visual impact, so there really wasn't much question about which hardware we would use. If we were going to realize the promise of the demo we had shown at SIGGRAPH, nothing but the CD-ROM format would suffice."
Another reason that the team decided upon the CD-ROM as its media of choice was production costs. Carts were becoming increasingly expensive to produce, and this game would need multiple carts. The choice to use CDs brought the production costs down, and in turn made it cheaper and easier for the developers to use multiple discs. And the final reason for ditching the N64 is that upon testing some of the models that were created for the SIGGRAPH demo on N64 emulation kits, the performance was not nearly as good as they'd hoped for. Even if they shifted to the Nintendo 64 disk drive, which had some performance benefits, the size limitations would still be an issue. They also considered the Sega Saturn as a potential home for Final Fantasy VII, but again, the hardware limitations of that system were too great. So the team eventually decided on the Sony PlayStation, a newcomer to the video game scene, but was already giving the competition a run for their money. After jumping to Sony, the breakup was not clean. Nintendo reportedly told Square to never come back. Final Fantasy VII went on to become one of the best-selling games on the Sony PlayStation, selling more than 13.3 million units worldwide. It is often cited as one of the most influential games of all time. Did Nintendo miss out? I hope you enjoyed this look at the history of the Final Fantasy SIGGRAPH tech demo and a brief look at the decisions involved to make the switch from Nintendo to the Sony PlayStation. As mentioned before, all sources are linked down below. If you liked this video, feel free to leave a comment, like and subscribe. I do post video essays from time to time, but I also post video game archival footage to this channel. If you subscribe, you should only receive my video essays in your subscription feed, as I mark the archival media to not go to subscription boxes. This means that you shouldn't get spammed with my uploads. Thanks very much for watching.